As Lance explained, I've been providing flexible office space solutions now for about 20 years. And I started off with a small company that then went on to consolidate the industry back in the mid-1990s. And we raised about $100 million of equity and debt, and we rolled up of several hundred business center operations around the country, and then became known as HQ. After that, I started another company. We built it to about 25 locations around the country, sold that a few years ago, and as Lance just explained, I'm on the process, again, I'm very entrepreneurial, started a new venture called Quest Workspaces and started here in Florida, even though I'm from New York. And as Bob had said, it's always a welcome to come to Florida, especially in the middle of winter, especially with the winter we've been having up north. And Quest Workspaces started in Florida, and the reason for that is obviously as we're a tenant and we're also a landlord. And being a tenant, there were some amazing opportunities that we were able to take advantage of in the last year in Florida. And I see the potential for the Florida market. It's a place that people want to be. I feel that there's a lot of opportunity in the next few years to build a regional operation here in Southern Florida. So unlike Bob, I am not an economist. I don't have a lot of fancy charts and graphs. And I believe I was asked here to speak today because I can sort of give the story behind the graphs and see what happens on a day-to-day basis, especially with our smaller office users. But the first slide, I just wanted to speak a little bit about what our industry is all about. And it was funny, providing flexible workplace solutions. The title of this slide originally was an industry with an identity crisis. And the reason being is that our industry has been called several different things, from executive office suites to business centers. And this was probably 20 years ago. And after I thought about it, I realized that it's not so much that the industry has an identity crisis, but it's constantly evolving. And it seems as though we shift our name based on the needs of our clients and how that has changed over the last 20 years. And at one time, being called executive suites, our client base really was just executives. It was groups of small office users, not necessarily large corporations, but more entrepreneurs and startup organizations that wanted to compete with sort of the big boys. And they needed the resources that the larger companies had, so they came to us to be able to kind of increase their credibility and have that increased prestige. So executive suites, and then it goes on to develop into offices on demand. This is during the whole dot-com phase, when at that point speed to market was the primary driver for companies. So from there, flexible space, shared offices. In the UK, typically our industry is called shared space or serviced offices. And for some reason, that didn't really catch on in the US. I think maybe they're more comfortable with sharing in Europe, who knows. But now you hear quite often the term outsourced offices, third places, and alternative workplaces. And we're just a form we're a third place. We're a place that people get work done, be it from the corporate office to the home office. And there's a lot of other options in the middle there, but shared space or business centers is one of them. We represent the small office user, and I was just talking to Bob earlier, and he had said, yeah, it's interesting to hear how the startup companies or how the entrepreneurs are using space and how that market is growing or not growing. And the interesting thing is that when I say we represent the small office user, it's a company or startup or an entrepreneurial organization that needs a small amount of space. It's not necessarily just a startup organization. And a lot of people are surprised to hear that large corporations, for example, in our Miami facility, BlackRock, Sephora, Four Seasons, this is our client roster, besides the small entrepreneur that's breaking away from the large law firm and starting up their own office. And I'm gonna guess at this because unfortunately we don't have the same type of data that you do in your business, but I would say that on average, that corporate user can represent anywhere from 30 to 50% of our client roster within a business center. And someone asked, how is that? And it's typically the larger corporations, they have satellite groups, they have special project groups that may only be for 2, 3, 8 people that need to be accommodated, and sometimes only for a year, and that's why they come to business centers. So terms are flexible. Quite often people want immediate flexibility, immediate occupancy. It's plug and play. They get started. They don't have to invest in furniture and technology, IT bandwidth. And services are also important to some clients, meaning administrative, receptionists, and such. Who are our clients in terms of the mix of the client base? Now this is going to vary greatly depending upon the state or the actual local market. And even, for example, if not unlike your buildings, perhaps, if you're located next to a courthouse, your tenants are going to be obviously attorneys. It's pretty much the same for our industry. And people are surprised that it's a pretty broad audience. And this is what we currently have right now in Florida. But this type of breakdown and mix has been typical over the last 20 years, almost in every single market that I've worked in. Our industry serves as a precursor to the commercial office market. That is a chameleon. That looks like an alien chameleon. But it's the reason I put this up there, this is a funny story. It's something that I've noticed with Florida, and I don't know if anyone else in the room has noticed this, but this chameleon nature of the Florida tenant. And I'll just tell a quick story. I was meeting with a potential client of ours in Fort Lauderdale, and I said, well, tell me about your business. He said, well, we are now we broker gold and precious metals, and we also sell health insurance. So that's an interesting combination. And I said, wow. I said, tell me about. I said, before this was so popular. I said, let me guess, were you in the mortgage business? He says, yeah. How did you guess that? And then went on to say, and then before that, you're probably involved in some type of financial or Wall Street type company. He's like, oh my God, you're psychic. So I don't know if it's fickled or sort of adaptable. But what I found, and it's more so even in Florida than even in New York. It seems as though, on the smaller for the smaller type tenants, they sort of go with which I think is a good thing. They go where the demand is in terms of industry and business. The reason I say that our industry is a precursor to the commercial office market is that because of the short-term nature of our leases, when things go bad, they go bad really, really fast in our industry. And I've learned this through the dot-com. I lived through this through the dot-com bubble bust. Because of the fact that people are not committed to 10-year leases typically, if somebody needs to shed space or give space back, they can do it relatively quickly. Our average lease agreement is probably 18 months, but our terms go as short as a month or weeks. So, and I also we acquired a company right before the whole mortgage crisis started in Orange County, literally 3 months before that, and we saw very quickly that a lot of entrepreneurs were using the equity in their homes to get their businesses started, and when that stopped, we felt that immediately, even before it was you heard and read about it in the news. On the flip side, the positive piece of this is that when the market is recovering, we tend to see that activity quickly as well. And what's the next slide here? What we've seen happening is that there's definitely an increased demand in companies needing space, both the small office user, and I wish I had a wonderful graph like Bob has to sort of illustrate this, but it's more of what we see on a day-to-day basis with the activity and with leasing. But there's the small office user they're back. There's this increased sense of entrepreneurialism. It's and it was interesting when I was talking to Bob earlier as far as the cycle that we go through. Is that it seems as though things have stabilized. People are not giving space back. They're now looking to increase the amount of space, and their businesses are starting. But the interesting piece about it that we're still finding is that there's still a huge amount of supply out there. So we're sort of feeling ourselves kind of moving out of this stage right now, which is encouraging. And I'm also very optimistic about that as well. This I had to speak about this. This is interesting because after doing this for 20 years, I've seen how our clients' needs have changed over time. And it's funny when you look back 20 years and how things were different in the way that we worked compared to just 5 years ago, even just 2 years ago. And you see the speed at which all this change is taking place. And what we're finding today is that cost is a huge concern to people as well. And it still is. And it's not just the smaller office users, but I'm not sure if all the brokers out there are finding this, but it's even the larger office users. We did a deal with a very, very, very large firm just recently, and what they put us through in terms of negotiation, we're talking about hundreds of dollars on every single service going back and forth. So there's definitely this sort of, even though people are, I think, business is improving, there's still this very, very, very focus on cost and saving. So we're constantly battling that, in sort of showing the value in the services that we provide and trying to generate the dollars that we think we should be getting for it. Growth is conservative. Okay, I find that there's not this kind of heyday, kind of explosive growth, which is consistent with what Bob was saying. But companies they're taking baby steps, in terms of what they're renting and how they're using and utilizing the space. Technology specifically to bandwidth. I had to mention this because I think back 20 years ago when I first started in this industry, and when we first put in, dating myself, when we put in a phone system that had voicemail. And I remember all of our clients just were completely up in arms because they didn't want to have calls go into voicemail. They wanted handwritten messages. And you think about today where, people don't even necessarily want their calls to be screened or answered. They go straight to your cell phone. So, and how that has changed in terms of how come people are working and what they need. And really, right now, what we're finding today is that our clients don't even necessarily even want a telephone. They say we're fine working off of our cell phones, but they need to have the bandwidth. Everything is running off of bandwidth today, and that is so much more important than telephones. Services are obviously evolving as a result of that. This is an interesting component. The amount of space that people are using today per workstation compared to years ago has shrunk considerably. And we're finding that people are renting, our average size offices are about 150 square feet. And at one time that would be a one-person executive office. And today, we have companies, startups and larger companies putting 3-4 people in 150 square feet. So people are making use of a lot less space, and there's studies that Gensler's done as a result of that. Options, one of the things we also found is that options have increased and space has become more of a commodity. Today, if somebody needs to have flexible space or short-term space, they can do a Google search, and there will probably be about a dozen online internet brokers that will pop up and be able to provide resources for them and space options for them. So we're finding that the way in which it's being procured and as far as resources to find that space has increased dramatically. Excess space and sublets, we talked about this, and what we're also finding is that a lot of landlords are also starting to provide these flexible space options within their building and in their portfolios. Virtual offices are on the rise. They're saying that the amount of virtual office users today is going to double by 2016, and that number is staggering. We're saying that it's going to increase by millions. It's about 30 million. Workplace trends. This statistic is very interesting to me because there's been a lot of studies about this, and in terms of corporations managing their real estate, most of the space sits empty. And everybody that walks through your own offices, you see this at 60% of the time, there's nobody sitting in those desks. And that when I talk about it in a minute, is that's sort of the rise of this whole workplace strategy to shed real estate expenses. And I think this is going to also, when I talked to Bob earlier, he said, we were talking about, the discussions today. And he goes, are you going to blast me? And I thought that was really interesting. I said, what do you mean by that? And after what you explained what happened in Orlando, now I understand. So, I have a very optimistic view on sort of the future of the workplace. But the one component I think that can sort of be difficult to project is not necessarily the amount of job growth, but also as these jobs grow, how are companies, are they going to actually put people in office space? Are they going to put them at workstations? Are they going to let them work from home? And that's going to be the difficult thing, I think, to project. Corporate initiatives to increase space utilization and shed costs. We're seeing this quite often now, through large companies and also smaller companies. Large corporations are recognizing the need for flexibility. They don't want to be tied to multiple-year leases. It used to be that large companies would just see us as this temporary solution. Now what they're starting to find is that it makes more sense, even if there's a higher cost per dollar, to put their groups, and I'm not talking about 100 workstations groups, but up to 10, 20 workstations into business centers, because they need the agility. And their needs are changing so rapidly that that flexibility, there's a premium placed on it. Outsourcing seen as a smart alternative. The smaller corporations at one time wanted to be in business centers because of the fact that it increased their prestige and credibility. What I'm finding today is people are less concerned about that. It's not, they don't need to have necessarily a particular address or be in a particular building to be seen as credible. It's the days of companies being founded by 25-year-old techies that are working out of their garages. And right now, people are choosing their spaces based on what's important to them personally. So, for example, we have a location on Brickell Avenue. We're constantly selling the prestige of being on Brickell, but quite often, sometimes, people they may make a choice to be closer to their home because they want to catch their son's soccer game, versus the prestige that may be associated with the address or the particular building. So there's a different, the way in which they're making their office decisions is changing. And then this one's really interesting. Is the definition of success today is not the large corner office, but it's the idea that you don't even have to go to an office. Everybody wants that type of freedom, that they don't have to be tied. So from a cultural standpoint, sort of people are viewing the office much differently. Flexible work programs, telecommuting, people call it remote working. All these types of programs, basically, when you look at it, I see it as, this is the stuff that I worry about. I see it as less office space being leased over time. And they're saying it's, there's a lot of different drivers that are causing this. And, one is that workers want it. And what I'm hearing from a lot of HR executive friends of mine is that, people are concerned about attracting top talent, keeping that top talent, and keeping them operating at peak performance. And so therefore, it's not necessarily just a decision to shed costs, but it's to keep their employees happy. And if there's flexibility built into their programs, then someone's going to choose that over a non-flexible program. The other driver is that this can reduce the corporate real estate expenses by 50%. There's a lot of companies right now that are doing this. Nokia, HP, Sabre Systems. I'm a lot of you that I've seen at Cornet. You hear case studies about this all the time, where companies are shedding up to 50% of their real estate expenses by putting in flexible workplace programs and letting people work from homes or from satellite offices. The other interesting thing, the other driver to this whole thing, is that government is also very much involved in this, and and I believe it's twofold. One is to go green, and one is to save green, because if they can now also cut their real estate expenses as well, it's good for the environment. And it's interesting. Government has mandated 28% reduction in carbon emissions in 2020 through its facilities and commuting. By letting people work from home, they're saving. It's helping the environment just in the CO2 emissions from the commute, and also obviously in operating the facility. New destinations for work. I don't know if I hear this all the time, is that work is something that people do, not a place that they go. Companies are now measuring results based on the performance, not necessarily the time that you put it in the office or the hours that you work. So, this whole idea of work and work being accomplished in an office is changed dramatically. And obviously, I have a picture of Starbucks here. It's the whole Starbucks phenomenon, the Panera phenomenon. And these third places that people are accomplishing work, like I said, it's between the home and it's between the corporate facility. And I'm fascinated by this, because new options are springing up all the time. It's not just the coffee shops and the libraries. I'm not sure if a lot of you have heard of co-working facilities. But these co-working facilities are basically sort of community centers where entrepreneurs, and they're geared more towards startups and entrepreneurs, are basically, they sit at tables like this. They have electricity and they have bandwidth. And they sit side by side other entrepreneurs. They share ideas and they network together. And this is how they're starting their companies. And there's no walls. There's a lot more collaborative space. People are able to communicate together and work together. And I think they're going to see a lot more of these. And the other interesting thing that I found is that in New York City, which is where I'm from, the economic development group is actually getting behind these co-working facilities now, and they're offering up grants, and they're partnering with institutions to offer an education piece. And in the 20 years doing this, I've never seen like the EDC in New York City actually take interest, and now they are. Incubation centers, same thing. College campuses now, they call them incubation for small entrepreneurs and small businesses to get started. Corporate uses of touchdown spaces. They also call these satellite offices. We've been contacted quite often from a group that represents large corporations for their flexible space. And quite often these large companies, well-known companies, what they will do is they'll ask for us to potentially manage or open what they call these satellite offices. And they're offices between where their employees work and where their corporate facilities are. So you're going to see these little small satellite offices springing up. Time Magazine, Knowledge Workers, Alternative Workplace. Basically, the idea is that people are going to be working from these types of facilities, and it's going to continue. It's a trend that they think is going to build. Will these trends continue? I can't see how it wouldn't. You know, there's like I said, there's many drivers that's pushing this trend. Workers want it. Everybody wants flexibility in the way that they work. Companies are able to reduce costs, so there's initiative to save expenses, and it seems as though there's been a bigger push recently because there's been pressure on companies to save money and cut costs. Government is now mandating it because of the effects on the environment, and technology is now able to enable it. You know, I think there was always this concern: if I don't see you working, then you're not producing. And now with technology, there's several tools in place where companies can measure results without having to see you, or they'll see you through Skype and video conferencing. What does this mean for the future of commercial real estate? Well, you know, I think it's pretty clear. Companies are using less space per worker. Companies want and need shorter lease terms. Landlords must accommodate the tenant's desire for flexibility. You know, it seems as though, you know, with leasing, you know, there's always been that standard of the 10-year lease, the 5-year lease. I believe that in time, and I don't know how much time, none of us really know what time, I don't have a crystal ball, but in time, there's going to be a point where the much shorter term lease is going to become more standard, and that obviously there's a whole slew of issues resulting from that, underwriting in buildings and valuations of buildings and such. But I think it's going to come to a tipping point where in order to rent that space and to do those leases, that there's going to be built-in flexibility. And it's not just going to be because it's a tenant market, but it's because that's what tenants really want. And you know, I believe that this is sort of that thing that keeps me up at night. Like, you know, are we going to be the Netflix, or are we going to be Blockbuster? You know, and so there's gosh, how do we become Netflix? I really don't want to be Blockbuster. You know, and you know, so you don't want to sort of, you know, you don't want to bury your head in the sand and say, gosh, you know, what does this all mean? You want to sort of look ahead and say, okay, what does this mean today, and what does this mean, you know, in the next 2 to 5 years? What can you do to adapt so that you're not sort of left behind? And you know, I think that owners and landlords that sort of see this and understand it, they can make changes, and they can sort of capitalize on that. And I think it's simply just seeing your space, you know, seeing this not just as an asset, like a non-fluid asset, but as really a service. And you know, I'll give you an example that, you know, even just in terms of, you know, and I don't know how many owners or developers are in the audience, but you know, look at it as though you're branding something, and you're going to differentiate your building, and not just the location or just like the physical elements of the building, but really creating sort of a buzz about that space. You know, this is what we need to do in our industry, and I think as landlords to do the same thing for their portfolios, I think that's going to give you a competitive advantage that's going to make a difference. And I threw some ideas out here. You know, we had a client in Miami that wanted to ride his bike to the office. So, you know, we figured out a way to accommodate him. So, and that's going to become now, you know, I see it a lot in New York City, that buildings are being built with bikes, actual bike storage within their buildings. You know, because people now are starting to ride, especially in New York. If I lived here, I'd ride to work all the time. It's so beautiful. But showers, different, maybe wiring. There's been this whole push of wiring buildings. But I know of a lot of small buildings where landlords actually provide the VoIP phone systems and such, and it's been very popular. And their buildings have stayed full through this whole recession. Cafes, meeting rooms, outdoor space. Even can lobbies be used as sort of a business center, or maybe business center is not the right word, but sort of a lounge? Like turn your, this may sound crazy, but is there a way to, you walk into these massive building lobbies, what's the purpose? What if you actually set them up, like for example, Sheridan has a program called Link, where they've taken, they did the same thing with their hotel lobbies. They said, okay, here's this wasted space, right? The business centers are stuck back in the corner. People want to socialize. Let's turn our lobbies into sort of a community, but let's say a Starbucks. They put up a little coffee shops. They have a lounge, and this is where people meet, and it's been very well received, and they're putting them in all the Sheridans. Maybe there's a way that a building, and it's not going to work for every building, but there might be a better use of that lobby space to sort of create sort of a draw and create a buzz. So anyway, I think that's my last slide. There you go. That's it. So I am optimistic. But at the same time, I'm sort of fascinated by the way in which work is changing and the way in which people are working and what that means for all of our businesses. And for those of you in retail, I think a lot of this would also apply. So does anybody have any questions? All right, well, thank you. Thanks.